An ordinary shift at a small diner turns extraordinary when waitress Emma notices something shocking. The billionaire CEO sitting at her table signs his name exactly like her late father. What follows is an emotional reunion of memories, gratitude, and the lasting power of kindness. Watch this heart-touching story and discover how one man's compassion continues to change lives. And don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Breeze for more inspiring true stories. The late afternoon sun slanted through the wide windows of Maple Street Diner, painting the worn linoleum floor with warm stripes of gold. Emma Miller wiped down the counter with a practiced rhythm, humming softly to the tune of the jukebox's mellow jazz. The diner was quiet at this hour, just a couple of truck drivers finishing their coffee and an elderly couple sharing a slice of pecan pie. The bell above the door jingled, and Emma glanced up out of habit. A man stepped inside, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not a small-town cafe. His polished shoes caught the light, and a sleek watch glinted on his wrist. Something about his presence, calm but commanding, made even the jukebox seem to lower its volume. Emma greeted him with a friendly smile. "Good evening, sir. Table for one?" "Yes, thank you," he replied, his voice smooth and measured. He chose a booth by the window, setting down a leather briefcase with quiet precision. Emma poured him water and handed over a menu. "I'll have a black coffee and a slice of your house apple pie," he said after only a glance. His tone carried a certain decisiveness, as though he was used to making choices that affected entire companies. As Emma entered the order, she found herself wondering about him. Outsiders weren't rare, but this man stood out in a way she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the hint of weariness in his eyes despite the sharp suit, or the way he observed the diner as if memorizing every detail. When she brought the steaming coffee and warm pie, he thanked her with a polite nod. "Looks perfect," he said, his deep voice tinged with something like nostalgia. Emma busied herself with refilling sugar containers, but she couldn't help glancing his way. There was something familiar about his features, the strong jawline, the thoughtful pause before each bite. It stirred a memory she couldn't place. Eventually, he signaled for the check. Emma printed the receipt and walked it over. "Here you go, sir," she said with a smile. He retrieved a black fountain pen from his jacket and signed with quick, elegant strokes. Emma reached for the slip and froze. Her eyes locked on the signature, Richard Hayes, but it wasn't the name that made her heart stutter. It was the handwriting. The slant of the letters, the looping flourish of the H, even the firm underline, it all looked achingly familiar. She saw it every time she opened the small box of keepsakes in her apartment, where she kept old letters from her late father, Daniel Miller. Her breath caught. Could it be a coincidence? Hands trembling slightly, she pulled out her phone and opened a photo of one of those cherished letters. The resemblance was uncanny, almost identical. Emma's heart pounded. Gathering her courage, she approached the booth and said softly, "Sir, that's my dad's signature." The man looked up, startled, his coffee cup pausing halfway to his lips. For a moment the diner seemed to hold its breath. The faint clink of silverware from the other tables faded as Richard Hayes lowered his coffee cup and studied Emma's face. His sharp, executive composure softened into confusion. "Your dad's signature?" he asked carefully, his voice a low rumble. "I don't understand." Emma swallowed, suddenly aware of how absurd it might sound. "My father, Daniel Miller, he passed away years ago. But that signature," she pointed to the receipt with a trembling finger, "it's exactly the way he wrote his name. I'd recognize it anywhere." Richard looked down at the elegant swirl of his own writing, his brow furrowing. "Daniel Miller," he repeated, almost to himself. "I once knew a Daniel Miller." His gaze drifted past her for a second, as if reaching back through decades of memory. "We were college roommates. Best friends, really. We called each other brothers." Emma's breath caught. My dad used to talk about a best friend named Rick. He said you were, she stopped, her voice breaking. But he never mentioned your last name. A flicker of recognition lit Richard's eyes. Rick, that's what he called me, he said, a small, incredulous smile tugging at his lips. He set down his pen and leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. We lost touch after graduation. Life just pulled us in different directions. Emma's throat tightened. Dad always wondered what happened to you. He said you were the kindest, most ambitious person he'd ever met. Richard exhaled, a sound heavy with memory. Your father was the kind of man you never forget. He once saved my life. Emma blinked. Saved your life? It was during a hiking trip, Richard explained. We were 20, maybe 21. I slipped on a ridge and nearly fell into a ravine. Daniel caught my arm, held on until help came. I remember thinking, if it weren't for him, I'd be gone. He paused, his eyes distant. I always meant to thank him properly. But after college, I got caught up in building my business. Letters returned unopened, numbers changed, and time just kept moving. Emma's chest ached as she listened. She could almost see her father, strong, steady Daniel, grinning at a young Richard as they conquered trails together. Richard reached into his leather briefcase and retrieved a worn envelope, edges frayed from travel. I've carried this for years, he said quietly. A letter I wrote to him when my first company succeeded. I never found an address to send it. Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. The weight of it felt like a bridge across time. Her eyes stung as she whispered, he would have loved to read this. Richard's gaze softened. I wish I could have told him how much his friendship meant, how much his... The diner's low murmur returned, but for Emma and Richard, the world remained suspended, two lives unexpectedly rejoined by the signature of a man whose quiet goodness still lingered in every curve of ink. The diner's neon sign flickered against the twilight sky as Emma turned the worn envelope over in her hands. She could almost imagine her father's warm laugh echoing through the quiet room. Richard watched her with a gentle patience, his sharp corporate demeanor softened by the weight of shared memory. I never expected this, Emma admitted, her voice husky. It feels like Dad wanted us to meet. Richard nodded slowly. Maybe he did. Daniel always believed that kindness creates connections we can't see until the right moment. Emma blinked back fresh tears. That sounds like him. She traced the edges of the envelope. He worked so hard for us. Even after he got sick, he never complained. He'd give his last dollar to help someone else. Richard's eyes glistened. I'm not surprised. Your father was the most selfless person I've ever known. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a sleek folder embossed with his company's logo. There's something I want to share with you. Years ago, when my first company began to thrive, I created a scholarship in honor of the friend who once saved me. I called it the Daniel Miller Foundation, hoping that somehow it would reach him or his family. Emma's breath caught as he slid the folder across the table. Inside was a letter of invitation and a formal grant certificate. This scholarship helps students who show the same generosity and perseverance your father embodied, Richard explained softly. I've been searching for his family to give them the first official recognition. Now, I finally can. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. You named a foundation after him? Her voice cracked with disbelief. He changed my life, Richard said simply. Every success I've had began with the confidence he gave me, and the day he refused to let me fall. I wanted the world to know the kind of man he was. Emma covered her mouth, overcome. Memories of her father's quiet sacrifices flooded her, the late nights fixing broken toys, the encouraging notes in her school lunches, the steady love that never wavered. Richard gently placed a hand over hers. This scholarship is more than a tribute. I'd like to offer you a position on the foundation's board, if you're willing. It's your father's legacy, and it belongs to you as much as to me. Emma nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd be honored. He would be so proud." Richard raised his coffee cup in a quiet toast. "To Daniel Miller," he said. "The man whose kindness still changes lives." Emma lifted her water glass, her heart swelling with gratitude. "To Dad," she echoed. Outside, the last rays of sunset bathed the diner in a soft glow. Two strangers, forever linked by the memory of a good man, shared a moment that felt like a promise, that true kindness never fades. It lives on, in friendships rekindled, in opportunities offered, and in the simple power of a signature that bridged years and brought hearts together once more.